and especially Mrs. Zanele, who's been lifting us and who has taught us not to push the ladder when you get to the top. You know, when I got to the AU, it was the time when AU was celebrating 50 years of the formation of the OAU. And so in 2013, everyone was gathered there to celebrate that 50 years. So we reflected on the 50 years and reflected on what those who came before us did and thought. And one of the things that inspired us was that in 1945, in Manchester, at the Pan-African conference that they had there, one of the decisions they took there was Africa must be decolonized within 50 years. And after taking that decision, they went about creating institutions. In fact, it was Women First who had the Pan-African Women's Organization a year before the OAU was established.
Wow. Impressive.
Then the OAU was established, then they created liberation committees and all sorts of structures to ensure that within 50 years, Africa is decolonized. And let me tell you, other than Western Sahara, Africa was decolonized within 50 years, and South Africa was on the 49th year.
Wow.
So then we said to ourselves, okay, that's what they are celebrating. When they come back after 50 years, when they celebrate the centenary, what would they be celebrating? What would they say was done in these 50 years? So that's what inspired us. And actually, they didn't want it at the beginning because they said the norm is to, when you come as the chair, you come for 4 years, you have a 4-year strategic plan. So I said, no, I'm not going to have a 4-year strategic plan.
Yeah.
So there was I'll tell you an interesting story about it. There was a very robust debate. They were saying, no, we don't understand this thing. We won't be alive in 50 years. Why are we talking about 50 years? So then the foreign ministers decided that I must organize a retreat for them to come and discuss this thing. So we organized a retreat. They came, and they said, you must then explain clearly to us this. So I had a speech that was done by the organization. I looked at it, I said, no, this won't cut it. Then I called Phoebe, but Giteru was with me there. I said, we're not going to sleep, we have to do another speech. We did. At midnight, we finished, we looked at it, and I still said no. And she was frustrated and saying, but we've done it together, what more do you want? I don't know what. Eventually, we came with the idea of writing a letter from the future.
Okay, wow. That's impressive.
Then we said from midnight to 6 in the morning, writing that letter. And then we said, who do we address this letter to? So eventually we said we address it to Kwame. So maybe you should go in the morning. Then we, instead of doing a speech explaining, I just read that letter to Kwame. And everybody liked it, and they said, no, now we understand what this Agenda 2063 is about.
Yeah.
We want it. And they even said, don't have a speech for the summit, read the same letter.
Wow.
So I said, heads of state will say I'm undermining them. So they said, no, please, just read the same letter, which I did.
Yes.
And then it was accepted that we must then do Agenda 2063.
Sure. Doc, I want to interrupt you while you are continuing. the contents of that letter. I think if you could also let us into it, because if they were the culmination of what actually brought about Agenda 2063.
The content of the letter was what people in 2063 will be looking at Africa, what they will be seeing. A united Africa, a prosperous Africa. And you must go and read it yourselves. Because if I start telling you about it, then my time will be gone.
Yes, no, I fully understand.
But it was really just depicting the type of future, but saying, how did we get to that future? But the funny thing is, 6 months later, one of the foreign ministers that I won't name here comes to me and says, you are something else. So I said, oh, what have I done wrong? He says, do you know that we were going to kill that thing at that retreat?
Sure.
We had all decided it must be killed. And you were able to change our ideas just through that letter.
Sure.
So I then said to myself, so that idea of the letter was not mine. It must have come from the African ancestors. Because they must have known that the foreign ministers are coming to kill it. I didn't know. They knew, so that's why they kept saying no, until this idea of the letter to Kwame.
Yeah.
But then Agenda 2063 itself was not drafted by us sitting in Addis as bureaucrats.
Yes.
We had consultations with almost every sector. We had consultations with women, youth, trade unions, private sector, artists, you name it, scientists, because we wanted the Africans themselves to say, what do they want?
Yes. Yes.
It must be their voice, not our voice sitting in Addis. So after those consultations, we then came with Agenda 2063. And the Agenda 2063 has 7 aspirations.
Yep.
You can read them. I won't go through them. It has 7 aspirations. But we also decided that women must be very prominent in Agenda 2063. Every aspiration, of course, affects everyone, men and women. But we decided that we're going to have one aspiration that's going to be just dedicated mainly to women.
Yes.
And that's aspiration, nobody knows, 6.
Yeah.
Aspiration 6. So I wish you had asked me to just talk on Agenda 2063, but that's a conversation for another day. So you're asking whether there is any
Yes, if
progress.
we have seen any progress, yes, any shift.
Yeah. Well, it's slow like everywhere else because Agenda 2063 is about the continent that will stand on its own, that will be united, prosperous, peaceful, and that prosperity will be driven by its people. And that we will be playing a dynamic role in the global arena. That's what Agenda 2063 wants in Africa like that. But before I get into whether there is a shift, you can't have successful Agenda 2063 until there is a shift in our minds.
Certainly. Yeah.
Steve Biko, which is where I started my real activism in Black consciousness, once said, the most powerful weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed.
So true.
So we have to decolonize our minds if we are to have this prosperous continent. President Bey, you remember, he didn't say, I'm a South African.
Yes.
He said, I'm an African. Until we think of ourselves as Africans, living in South Africa, living in Lagos, living in Accra, as long as we think we are South Africans, we'll never achieve Agenda 2063. So from now on, we should say we're Africans.
Yes.
Then I live in Joburg, I live wherever, but I'm an African.
Yes.
Because also, we are so interdependent that there can be no island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. So Africa must move together. That's what Agenda 2063 says.
Certainly.
But it also says we must deal with the paradox of Africa, which is a rich Africa and poor
And a poor
Africans.
African.
We have everything on our continent that other people are using
Yep.
to prosper. But now we send it to them,
Yes.
and we send the jobs with it. We send the raw minerals. When you send raw minerals, you are sending high-level jobs. You are exporting those jobs
Yes.
instead of creating them in your own country.
Yes.
You are also exporting revenue, because by that time that thing comes as a finished goods, it's probably 10 times or even more. Sometimes you can't even afford it.
Yeah.
So I think that is beginning. It's not yet, we're not yet there, but people are beginning to say, let's really do that. Our natural resources, let's process them here.
Yes.
But also, why does Africa, which has 60% of the global Arab land available, global,
Yeah.
60% is on our continent, but we spend more than 50 billion US dollars importing food. That's disgraceful.
Yeah. It is.
So the mindset must change. We must consume what we produce
Yes. Certainly.
and produce what we consume.
Yes.
Because who will respect a continent that can't even feed itself? Nobody. Instead of looking for aid and crying when they take it away,
Yeah. Certainly. Yeah.
we should be saying, let's use what we have and create a continent that is prosperous, and it's possible.
Yes.
But it's not possible for the continent to prosper if women don't prosper.
Certainly.
So women must be part of that prosperity. And we start there. We talk about rural areas
Yes.
and agriculture. 70% of people who work in agriculture on
Are
this
women,
continent are women.
Yes.
But they don't own land. So that must change. In one of the countries, men and women used to work, but women mainly on the land. But when the man is tired of you,
Yeah. He chases
get
it.
rid of you, the land stays with him, and you go with nothing.
Yep.
When they changed that law and said, if you chase the women away, you divorce,
Yeah.
half the land
The
goes
land,
to
yeah.
the woman, half stays with you. The attitudes of men towards women changed. Because now they could see, if I treat her badly,
I also lose a share.
and she goes with half the asset.
Yes.
Because sometimes they treat us badly because they think we own nothing, we're just dependent on them.
Yeah.
So giving women land
Yes.
changed even the power relations
Yes.
at home.
Yes.
So it's important, but for me, Professor is here. The basic thing,
Yeah.
if we really want prosperity and we want to deal with poverty, we want to education and skills.
Certainly. Yeah.
That's why in Agenda 2063 we say the continent needs a skills revolution. Because education and skills are the fastest equalizer.
Yes.
If you come from a very poor home, but you are sitting in the cockpit, piloting the plane with a person who comes from a rich family, you are equal in the cockpit,
Yes, true. Yes.
Certainly.
right?
Yes.
If you are the VC, doesn't matter where you came from, you are equal with other VCs.
Yes.
So, education and skills
Yes.
is fundamental.
Certainly. Yeah.
Of course, health, because without health, there's nothing you can do. So, Agenda 2063 looks at that. It looks at beneficiating our own minerals. But one of the things we said, we must trade amongst ourselves.
Yes.
If you were to ask South Africa, who's your biggest trading partner?
Let's say
They won't
China.
name an
Yes.
African country.
Yeah. Certainly.
It will be across the seas. So, Agenda 2060 says we must trade amongst ourselves.
That's right.
Yes, we can trade with the world. We're not saying we shouldn't, but let's trade amongst
Yes.
ourselves.
Yes.
And that's why we then said we must have a continental free trade.
Yes.
Agreement.
And that's progress because it was, I remember we launched the negotiations here in South Africa at the AU summit in
Yes.
2015.
Yes.
And we said by 2017 we must be done with the negotiations. And they said, oh, she's so naive. Trade negotiations take a long time. You think you can finish by 2017? We said, no, it's not God who says it must take a long time, it's us.
Yeah.
So if we take long, we can also make it short.
Yes.
And fortunately, by 2018, they were signing the agreement. Now, 49 or even 50 countries have
Yes.
assented
ratified,
to it.
yes.
So we now need, now needs implementation. They are looking at payment systems
Yes.
because why should we always be paying through a dollar?
A dollar.
Must change your rand to a dollar. Then it gets to the other side. They must change the dollar to their currency. And in the process, you're also losing money.
Yes. Yeah.
So they are doing quite a lot of things now to
Yes.
implement that.
Yes.
But also, there was a decision that we must have what is called interoperability in
Yes.
terms of payment, where you can pay Nigerian,
Kenya,
you can pay so Ghana and Nigeria are almost there. But we must all get our
Yes.
governors of reserve banks to buy into that so that we can then trade and pay for whatever
Yes.
easily.
So
That's the basis of
Yeah.
what Agenda 2063 wants.
Yes.
But it also says we must have world-class infrastructure. Because if you don't, how can you have trade amongst yourselves if you don't manufacture?
Yes.
33 countries on this continent still experience electricity outages, including ours.
Yes.
So we have to ensure that energy infrastructure is there,
Yes.
and we produce energy, which is the lifeblood for companies to run.
2 years for productivity.
Besides homes,
Yes.
companies. So infrastructure. But once you have manufactured,
Yes.
how does a good from here go to Senegal
Yeah.
if you don't have infrastructure that connects us?
Yes. Yeah.
So we need road, we need rail,
Yes.
we need
freight.
sea,
Yeah.
we need air
Yes.
to connect ourselves.
Yes.
And also, the Agenda 2063 says we must look at the ocean
As an economy.
as
yes.
a huge economic frontier. Africa has five seas. 5. 2 oceans, the Indian and the Atlantic, No, 3, and the
Three, and
Antarctic.
the Antarctic as well.
3. And then the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. But how much activity
Yes.
in these seas is by us?
Yes.
You can fly up and you'll see lots of boats, but they are not ours.
Yes.
But 90% of our goods that leave our countries
By
are
sea.
transported
By
through the
sea.
maritime
Yeah.
highways.
Yes.
And those that come in through the maritime highways,
Yeah.
but who are not there.